Well, welcome to Prophetic Perspectives on Current Events. And that's what we're seeking to have, to share with you, a prophetic perspective on what's happening in our world today. And, you know, there's almost constant, immediate crises that pop up. But I want to just share with you what we want to talk about over the next 2 to 3 programs. Of course, we do it seeking to answer the questions, what is happening, what is not happening, and what can we do about it? And I'm here with Chris Reed, and he's going to be piping in. But first, I'm just going to read off some of the things we want to be covering. The vaccine mandate madness, and what should be our perspective as Christians on the vaccines and as American citizens as well. Then we have the DOJ, Department of Justice, trying to walk back the threats against parents who challenge school boards. Now remember, they were called domestic terrorists by the head of our Department of Justice. And our leading law enforcement position in the entire country. And the Attorney General actually made reference to them as domestic terrorists. Now, he got called before some Senate hearings, tried to walk it back, but guess what? Their policy and their actions didn't change at all. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about the supply chain disruptions, the impact that's going to have on us. Inflation, what does that mean? What is the impact? How do we prepare for it? The growing border crisis, which is also connected, it's not the only thing, but it is a major connection to the crime increase in America, which has gone up over 70% in some cities. Continued fallout from Afghanistan, the increasing incompetence of those responsible for our national defense. And we see this being manifested in challenges like this new supersonic cruise missile threat from China and how our people are reacting to it. It's showing an incredible ineptness in our Department of Defense. We need to be aware of. We need to be praying for our leaders, but we also there are radical changes that need to come to get our country back on course. And we as Christians should be the salt and light helping these things happen. I want to talk about an incredibly courageous NBA player who took on Nike, considered the most powerful force in sports today. And he gave a very courageous rebuke of Nike for their silence and even using child and slave labor to make their shoes and all. And thank God for anyone who stands up with courage today. We want to talk about it a little bit. Talk a little bit about climate change and how it fits in all that is happening, how this agenda dovetails with a major overall agenda, and then the rising persecution against churches and Christians.
Yeah. Well, as you often say, we are in a rich environment for targets, for discussion, and I do think that God is highlighting courage of the people of God, but also just everyday American citizens that are willing to speak up and speak out against growing government oppression, but also just to stand for traditional American values and traditional Christian values. And I think that the more those kind of people with courage, everyday Americans like you that stand up, stand for what is right, God is highlighting people like that in this season, Rick.
Yeah. Not just highlighting them, he's anointing them.
Yeah.
I tell you, you see the people respond.
Mm-hmm.
The people want to follow courage and truth. Well, let's start with the vaccine mandate. And just like to share a couple of things about it, but concern truth in general and discerning truth and discerning lies and the potential agendas behind the lies. Now, I'm not saying that the vaccine is not legitimate at all. I think there's some arguments and persuasive arguments on both sides. Now, but one thing needs to get our attention. Truth has a distinguishable dignity about it and confidence. But when we have a pressure to conform and a suppression and inability to accept any challenges, there's something wrong behind that. I think that right there should get our attention whenever you see like this unbelievable media and social media attempt to crush any kind of challenge, any type of questioning of something. There is something really wrong. And when you see it being done on the level it's being done today, we know this is huge. Now, I think it's been coming out more and more that many people, I saw one study, and I don't call polls study, but most of the people who were hesitant about the vaccine, it was because of the way it was presented, and they just knew intuitively something is wrong with this thing. For them to just immediately, if there's any kind of challenge or questioning, it gets pulled down immediately from social media and everything else. There's something wrong there. There's something wrong when we see groups speak. That is the opposite of true science. We have a lot of fake science today, like we have fake news and fake just about everything else. But true science wants a challenge. They want their theories and everything else challenged from every possible position so that if there's any flaw in it, they can find it. That's the nature of true science. So when you see this overwhelming tendency to suppress any kind of challenge or questioning, we got to stand and say, okay, there's something wrong with this.
Yeah.
There's something really wrong here. And some of the things are starting to surface about what may be wrong.
Yeah, I think that right now there's a highlighted case in the state of Maine, Rick, about this very thing. And what's interesting is the state of Maine, up until this point, has acknowledged, the constitutional freedom for American citizens regarding vaccine exemptions. But what's been interesting is they have showed favoritism towards secular reasons for potential exemptions. But for religious exemptions, because of, for instance, like I believe it was the Pfizer vaccine that was developed using aborted fetal cells. Mm-hmm. And even though the end product result didn't have the cells in it, the fact is that goes against the conscience of many people without even bringing in without even considering how the vaccine could adversely affect some people's health, as we've seen examples of. And another one of the vaccines was not developed with aborted fetal cells, but the testing and the end result involved it. And so this is a real matter of conscience for religious people who have a very pro-life stand, and which, of course, we do, and we value life at all stages, and we don't want to just, give a blank check to any and all science that is basically taking life as an experiment. That's just one reason why there's a lot of concern about the vaccine mandates. And I honestly believe with all my heart, this is going to come before the Supreme Court. And depending on which case, that comes before the court, will have a major impact on how they rule. But it's just like anything else, if the right case comes up, then the conservative-leaning Supreme Court right now may really take a stand for religious and personal liberty and freedom in this vaccine mandate madness that you're speaking of.
Yeah. And I think this is a part two of the attempt to continually erode and disregard religious preference in general in our culture.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that when we talk about the increasing persecution of religion and especially Christians in our culture. But, you know, it was originally estimated, of course, this got pulled off the media real quick, originally estimated 50% of healthcare workers were opposed to the vaccine or didn't want to take it. Now, many of them changed when it came up that they're going to lose their job or whatever. Many haven't. Hundreds and even thousands across the country. Healthcare workers, these are the ones who really should understand this stuff, have that kind of reticence about something. It should get our attention.
Yeah.
And especially, we even had, and I tell you, some of the great heroes to me, we have some professional athletes who, they laid their income on the line and are not playing their sport right now, losing all that income, millions and millions, because they have, you know, an objection to it. And a lot of them, they don't know what to put their finger on, but they don't feel comfortable and at peace. And no question, a whole lot of that has been the way it's been presented. But I want to talk about something else that indicates that there's an agenda behind this or something really awry.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it the vaccine hypocrisy. Why did members of Congress and their staffs get exemption from this? And if it works, why would anybody want exemption? Why were riots and large demonstrations by the left not condemned as super spreader events, but church meetings and worship services were? They even said, don't sing. You know, you can't sing. If you have meetings, you got to be social distance, only have a fraction of the people you normally have, and you can't sing. But all of these giant demonstrations they had, the riots, everything else, and you looked at the news, you saw every now and then one person would have a mask on. None of them were condemned for being social spreaders. And then we have the illegals crossing our border, not tested, not vaccinated, and being shipped to communities all over America.
Taken by an airplane and dropped off at 2 a.m. so that the media, which they are catching it, but they're hiding it.
Yeah. Now, I probably didn't share anything with you weren't already thinking, because these things are obvious, and this is causing, Americans are not as stupid as our government seems to think we are. And this is causing uprising. It's causing the president's approval numbers to crash. But these things are obvious conflicts that we have here. Now, as I've shared, I put out not a policy, but a statement on the vaccine to all of our Morningstar people, just on the position. We have in our history people that really perverted the gospel, twisted it. Sometimes they were just twisted people trying to promote the gospel. That didn't mean the gospel was fake or wrong. We know the gospel's true, but the people presenting it. And I think science is going through right now one of the greatest challenges, the challenges that the church went through in its early years that actually led to the Dark Ages and the suppression of all truth, where it was even capital punishment to be caught with a Bible for centuries. Things like that. You're talking about suppression of truth. So I'm saying, we understand we've been through this as the church, and the whole Reformation or reformation of the church was the throwing off of those shackles. Well, science is being attacked right now and compromised, and we owe science a lot. We couldn't be doing this without science. We couldn't fly in our airplanes. We could virtually everything in our modern, world that makes our world so much easier. And many of the medical breakthroughs and all that have relieved so many people of suffering, we owe to science. And we need to be praying for science, for scientists, that they would have like the great voices in the Reformation that stood up and said, we will take our position, we will not compromise the truth as it is given to us in the scriptures, that there will be those who will rise in science and stand up for true science, which is always open to challenges, to being examined, to be looked at, to find any flaw, and it had that kind of integrity from the basis, not the kind of spirit that these things are being promoted in.
Amen.
And I could preach a long time on this one.
Yeah. Well, amen, number one. Number two, I think that a lot of people are forgetting an important distinction with this vaccine compared to ones, back in the 50s, like, for instance, in the days of polio and such. This COVID-19 vaccine, the reason why people are just concerned, or they're just wanting to have true science take an honest look at, this is a different kind of vaccine.
It's not really a vaccine.
Right. And there's only 10 years of history as far as studying the science of this kind of RNA binding vaccine. And just on top of that, the last 20, 30 years, the push and advancement for a vaccine for everything. Like, one example, when I was a kid, and I'm only 37, but I remember...
Still a kid.
Exactly. Yeah, I am. But I remember when I was a kid, chicken pox. There wasn't a vaccine being pushed for chicken pox. In fact, I remember as a kid, Rick, that if one of the kids in our neighborhood would get it, they would have what they called chicken pox parties.
So all the other kids would get it and get over with.
Get it over with. It's not a life-threatening thing.
Yeah.
But what has actually happened because of the mutating of what used to be considered a vaccine that, certainly at one time, 70 years ago, polio and things like that, the difference was in those days, if you got the vaccine, it was to protect you from getting, polio, for instance. This vaccine, not only do we only have about 10 years of history or research on it, in the science aspect of it, but then to think that this vaccine, which is involved with your DNA...
It actually reprograms your DNA.
It reprograms your DNA, and it doesn't stop you from getting it or spreading it. I mean, these are just a few of the flashing red light concerns that people have comparing this vaccine without a lot of history, comparing it to vaccines from 70 years ago.
Yeah. Now, I want to throw in one little thing about this. I'm, like I said, we are so thankful for science and all the good things it has done for us in the modern world, and especially in medicine, and where it's eradicated so many terrible diseases. And we want to see it continue to have the freedom where it would truly be able to do that and continue to do it. But you remember when the president came out, President Trump at the time, and brought up how hydroxychloroquine obviously will work on this thing. And now, immediately there was a comeback. No, it won't, because hydroxychloroquine was really cheap. You can get it. It had been FDA approved for decades, 30 or 40 years. No reactions, almost nothing. It's used as a malaria drug, where it just so happened it really worked on COVID. Every single person I've talked to, and this is not a scientific study, but every person I talked to was able to get a hold of hydroxychloroquine when they got COVID. It knocked it out within a day. It was gone. Every single person. I have not heard of a single person who took it who did not have that testimony. Then you wonder, why did hydroxychloroquine disappear from pharmacies? What is behind this? It's always been available, been cheap, but all of a sudden you can't get it, and then this vaccine is being pushed.
Yeah.
Now, I just submit to you, follow the money. And I do know, if you ever saw the movie The Fugitive, that was a true story. You touch on industries that have billions or trillions of dollars now invested in something, it's dangerous. So if I disappear, this is why. But we've got to stand up to this. Something really foul is going on. And these things make it look worse and worse. I'm just saying, bless their hearts. Now, the DOJ, Department of Justice, the Attorney General trying to walk back threats against parents who challenge school boards, and they called them domestic terrorists. And like I said, we had those hearings this past week of the Attorney General and him saying, no, we don't consider parents that way, and saying all the right things in the hearing, but their policies did not change. Are they still investigating? Are they still looking? And as far as I can tell, there's been no change in their behavior. And I tell you, we have a government now that's really very astute at getting their stories acceptable, but not changing their behavior at all. We cannot trust our government now because of their words. We've got to look at their actions. We've got to look at what the main issue is, what is being taught to our children in public schools. And another issue, it came out in the Virginia gubernatorial campaign, where one of the candidates said parents have no business influencing what is taught to their children in schools, which is absolutely anathema to the American way, the American liberty and freedom and everything else we've had in our history. And to say that about parents, we discussed too in previous prophetic perspectives about the meltdown going on in education, the corruption and collapse of education in America since the federal government took it over, which I believe was both illegal and unconstitutional. Very clear in 10th Amendment, federal government only has authority that is specifically given to it in the Constitution. It doesn't have authority because Congress gives it authority. It has to be in the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution is our federal government given authority over education. Education must be taken back by our states. We'll have a whole lot more to say about that later. You have anything you want to?
Yeah, I think that this gubernatorial race in Virginia, which, by the way, I truly believe Virginia is a state that in the coming days we're going to see highlighted more and more. And I think, in all sincerity, I believe that God loves, I know He loves our whole nation, but Virginia has so much, Rick, as you know, to do with the history of our nation. I really believe that the shakeup that is happening there, the statements that Terry McAuliffe made, I think it's intentional. In fact, right now, as everybody knows, Virginia has become a pretty solid blue state over the last 15 years or thereabouts. But I'll tell you, even the media is having to report that the gubernatorial race, which is the election will be the first Tuesday of November, of course, is neck and neck. I mean, they're basically tied, and some even has the Republican pulling ahead, and it is over this education issue. And I think that there is a gap between what liberal big government politicians are trying to make priority versus what is priority to the average, everyday, middle-class American people. And I think that gap is widening between what they want and what Americans want. And I think we're going to see it in these elections. It's going to show up.
I agree. I think it's going to show up big time if we don't have the fraud.
Yep.
I'm just saying.
I agree.
But yeah, I'm glad these things are becoming the hot topic subjects they should be. These are things that should be on the heart of everyone who is called by the Lord to be the salt and light in this earth. These should be issues with us. There are things that are corrupting our nation, corrupting our children, and we have to stand up for them. Now, there's one other, the next thing I wanted to talk about here, the supply chain disruptions. Now, this is, I believe, going to get more serious. It seems to be getting worse by the day, but there are serious shortages starting to appear, including food. Now, public schools, at first, I remember just a couple of weeks ago, I think it's one northern state said they're going to have to start closing public schools because they can't get food for their cafeterias. Then it showed up in a southern state, and then a whole lot of other states within a few days were saying, we may have to close our schools. Now, if cafeterias, school cafeterias, are going to have to close because they're not getting enough food supplies, watch out for your grocery stores. Now, I am hoping not to provoke any kind of panic or anything like that, but we have to be wise. We need to see these showing up. And just one other little comment, one of the first things to show up again, toilet paper shortages. And we need to understand that when that becomes a factor, it's because this crisis is scaring the you-know-what out of people, and it is a real crisis. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. We also need to learn the lessons. I believe many things God is allowing to come upon our country so that we are prepared for maybe some worse waves that are going to follow. Anything you want?
Amen. I completely agree. And I think the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, they don't have solutions. They're ignoring the problem or trying to. They don't have solutions. And this is what you have again. I think this is, and I pray for President Biden and the administration, but I don't know if we've ever had a more incompetent cabinet.
Never in our history.
Seriously. I mean, I know that's kind of a statement.
Now listen to Buttigieg's response to how he's going to deal with this crisis. He said, we're going to hire more interns. Like they're going to fix this big supply chain thing. But isn't that the Isaiah 5 judgment of God that comes upon the nation? It starts calling good evil and evil good, honoring the dishonorable while dishonoring the honorable, which is where our country has come. The judgment, first judgment of God is, I will give capricious children as your leaders. What do we have running our country right now? It seems like you said, every one of the cabinet positions, not just the president, our DOD, our Department of Defense, everything else, we've got incredible, profound ineptness throughout our government right now. And listen, the only way things are not going to get worse and worse, we've got to appeal to one who is on the throne above all thrones and all authorities, that he would bring restoration to our country.
And I agree. The situation that we've talked about so far, Rick, they're actually compounding each other. For instance, supply chain issues, okay? A lot of this is all interconnected to the need for employees. You can't get anybody to work. I'm sure you've probably been in restaurants or places where hired help, it's hard to find. And that's even being complicated even further by the vaccine mandates and long-term employees because of conscious or a desire just to have a choice on whether they take the vaccine, or getting fired or being forced to resign in a time when inflation and supply chain issues are causing real major issues in America. I mean, this speaks to the vaccine mandate crisis, but it is also connected to a lack of employees, a lack of people to do these jobs and fill these positions that we are now feeling the effect of.
And Another major factor here. Okay, look how far, now, just to tie in a little bit of something that's going on, inflation. Now, this is helping to spark inflation. I believe we're approaching the inflation levels that we had under the Carter administration. And if you say, well, that's not what the polls say, they're showing 5 or 6%. If you still believe the polls, if you still believe the reports coming out of our federal government, you need some help. We need some help. We're being lied to across the board. And if I ever became a leader, president, whatever, the first law I would promote is if it is against the law to lie to Congress, it should be against the law for them to lie to us, to the American people, because they work for us, not the other way around. They're lying to their employer. Yeah. And our government's lying to us every way it can lie to us, it seems. And trying to make everything look better, rosier, whatever, and we're in serious trouble. And some of them, they are not in tune with the fact this is a crisis and a major one in our country. But inflation, how did inflation jump to the levels it is? And in this year, some of you, many who shop, you go to the store and you see, wait a minute, this isn't a 5% increase in inflation. This doubled in price over the last year and many other things. Well, that starts because right away, the immediate policies from this president administration, after we had struggled and become energy independent, within just immediate executive orders, destroys our energy independence and makes us an energy dependent country again and set energy prices soaring. Now, energy is one of the main costs in everything. If you're watching this on a television, do you know that about 1/3 of your television is made out of petroleum? A lot of people don't realize virtually everything, this computer and everything is made a huge amount of petroleum in everything. And so the price of everything go up. Not only that, shipping, transportation. We've had, in some places, we've had energy costs more than double in our country. For basic gasoline, things like that. Just about everywhere, it's gone up at least 1/3. You're going to see about 1/3 of everything jump in price, that third. And so this is across the board. Now, again, it's another reason. Why would we throw away our energy independence? Not only energy independence, but we were an energy exporter, which was keeping energy prices down around the world.
Yeah.
And now, all of a sudden, we've got to import, which is driving up prices around the world. Listen, there are incredible consequences to these almost glib, reactionary policies, that some of which were made because they just wanted to do the opposite of what Donald Trump had done.
Yeah.
And we're all paying the price for that. And I tell you, it's getting worse by the day. We have to stand up. We have to speak out.
Absolutely. And, this anti-energy policy from the current administration is, it's all in the name of climate change. Literally, you have right now 12 or 13 members of the cabinet that's going to this United Nations climate forum to try to come together to do some kind of another additional agreement for climate change making. And China's not even showing up. One of the largest polluters in the world, and you're not even forcing China's hand to show up to this. Just to summarize real quickly, you have a situation where they're not, the president, the administration is not addressing the concerns of most people. People are concerned about the woke stuff. They're concerned about the crisis in education, the border crisis, inflation. Biden actually said this week that when he was asked about the inflation rise, he says that that the growing inflation is just transitory. Literally, that is what he said. And here he is so oblivious. You know, he has an approval rating at 37%. Since taking office, Rick, he has lost 27% with independents. You can't win an election without independents. And this is the lowest number for independents for any president in their first term since World War II. That is with skewed polls on the numbers.
I don't believe those polls. I don't believe his approval ratings are nearly that high.
Exactly. I don't believe very many people voted for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
If anybody that showed up to vote for him, they were voting against Donald Trump. I think the left voted against Trump, not for Biden. But there's just a real serious issue when even the liberal media is telling you he's only at 37% approval rating for all people in America.
Well, listen, we've got more to talk about. You don't want to miss our next prophetic perspectives. And just now, through the vaccine, controversy, whatever you want to call it, the issue, it's growing. It's not going away. We got the Department of Justice trying to walk back their challenge, threats against parents who challenged school boards, but it doesn't seem like their actions are following their words again. Got supply chain disruptions we discussed. And if you didn't catch these in the last program, you want to go back and catch it. Inflation approaching crisis levels during the Carter administration, and it's getting there so fast, it's almost unbelievable.
Yep.
I mean, those that hit over Carter, they did emerge during the Nixon administration, the Ford administration. They were growing, and then they kind of hit that critical mass under Carter, but they're getting there much faster this time. Now we need to, again, address, and I know we have in previous Prophetic Perspectives program, but the border crisis. Numbers, again, are being thrown around that are wildly inconsistent. The most accurate or consistent one I've seen that about 1.7 million were caught this year crossing our southern border illegally. And how many got through they didn't catch? And what percentage are they not catch? Is it in the millions? We don't know, but 1.7 million were caught, and they weren't sent back. They were released into our country. And here's another thing hardly anybody's talking about. A large majority are children without parents with them, just, teenagers or adults. And I think these are trafficked children. Sure. One of the greatest, worst crises and worst crimes of our times, human trafficking. And terrorists, they're catching some really bad ones. How many are getting through? And for every one they catch, there can be many, many that they're not catching. And they're rising. And some are still being released. Some they caught, some who had even were already indicted for murder and everything else. They caught and released them into our country anyway. And as I've shared for the years since I had it, I was shown that the border on the crisis would become so great in our country, the crisis on the border, that it would spark the states, the states in our country turning against the federal government, even to the point of driving out of every state every federal agent and wanting nothing more to do with our federal government. This would be the spark of another revolution in our country. Now, because I share these things, I'm shown, that doesn't mean I agree with them or want them. Of course, if there's any way, anything can be lessened. But I think the only way is if we wake up to what is happening and start standing up against these things now. Anything you want to say about the border here?
Yeah, I just seen this morning where the largest caravan yet is on their way here through Mexico. And we got a crisis there, and it's not just about the border. It's more than that. Biden has said that, they're going to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, the last I heard, which was a Trump policy. I mean, yeah, that's what you literally have, another Trump vindication, I told you so, but they changed it, which has led to this massive surge over 2021, all in the that had stopped under the former president. By and large, it had slowed down and all but come to a stop with these migrant caravans, and here you have a situation because Trump set the Remain in Mexico policy, and the only reason why Biden changed it was because Trump came up with it. How many crimes are going to be committed in America this year?
I mean, have been.
Have been. I mean, how much has happened all in the name of we just changed it because Trump was behind it? And how many deaths, how many rapes, all of this, how many terrible situations that now it's taken him 10 months to finally say, okay, well, we're going to restart that now. Obviously, we're not saying all people south of the U.S. border are murderers and rapists. Nobody is thinking that. But those individuals, those kind of people and criminals infiltrate crowds like that. And we can't be so naive to pretend that's not a reality.
Yeah. And, that also the Hispanic and Latino communities are the ones who suffer and are going to suffer the most because of this.
Right.
And they are some of the best communities in our country.
Yes.
There's some, they are some of the most incredible devoted Christians, devoted to family and community and morality, and they are some of the best immigrants we could ever have in our country. For those countries, and we need immigrants in our country to survive. America's built on immigration, and we need it just to keep fueling everything that is going on in America, our basic economy. And those are the ones, the legal ones here are the ones who are in the most jeopardy because of the illegals. They're the ones who have become the most vocal against this illegal immigration of our country. Now, we want many of these people that are coming. We need them here. We just want them to come the right way. And what that is, the only way that's going to be done is competent leadership defending our borders.
Yeah.
Where we know who is coming in, where we know they're not criminals, they're not murderers and rapists. And even if there's 1 or 2% who are, the devastation in our country and also the devastation towards those from those countries increases because many people start thinking, well, it's just coming from that community or whatever, and they're the ones who pay such a high price when they are not guilty, the innocent ones. So we've got to control our borders. It is basically scriptural. It says the Lord created the nations and gave them borders. And he put a curse on anyone who would change the ancient boundaries, the borders. There's a curse that comes upon you because he wanted to keep the definition of each nation, because God's unity is a unity of diversity, not a unity of conformity. And he doesn't want any nation to lose their heritage, their history, their roots. And his unity is one where we honor the diversity. We honor the nations, not where we come under this Marxist attempt to make everybody conform to to the groupthink, to the same way of thinking, dressing, doing everything. No, that is not true unity, and it will never work. It never has. But we have got to see. We've got to have our borders stood up. I am so appreciative the way the governor of Texas just announced we're going to defend our border. When they saw that new caravan coming, did you see the National Guard has been stationed all along the Texas border? And they said, you're not going to come in here. You are not, that is not going to happen here. I tell you, if every state, border state would do that, do what the federal government is the one that is constitutionally given the authority over immigration, comes under the authority for foreign affairs. We understand that, but if the federal government doesn't do our job, these states are saying, we will do it. We will protect our citizens, and we will protect our country from what is coming across our border right now.
Yeah, I'll just say for every person that's listening, every legal immigrant, and like Rick said, we're not against immigration. We just want it to be legal, as does every nation. Okay, if you came to America in your lifetime and you're hearing this, and you went the legal route, and you went because you respected our laws, you respected our nation, it should infuriate those people, legal immigrants who are becoming Americans, and we welcome that. It should infuriate every person that's done it legally to see the people that are doing it illegally and all the process you had to go through, the time you invested, living a good life, crime-free life, the money you paid and all of that to become a part of America. It should infuriate you when you see any people trying to go around the process you went through, because you respect the laws, you respect the process, and when they cross the border, just flagrantly, without respect, without regard, especially the people that are, that are doing drug migration, and they're also, the whole child situation where they're bringing children across to use kids. Human trafficking. Thank you. They're not even their kids. They just pick these kids up, claim that they're kids to be able to get into the nation. So we would be infuriated. That my heart goes out to the people that have come here legally.
Yeah. And it goes out, understand there are tragedies in these countries they're coming from. And most of it is because of Marxism.
Yeah.
There's absolutely wrecked their economies. Now it's trying to wreck ours. And we have to understand it, and we have to stand up against it. But we love people. We've got to love people. We love all people. God loves them all. But, there's, the next thing we were going to talk about, the crime in American cities. Some has increased. Some, it's been worse than this, but it looks like our big cities, mostly liberal-run cities, have had crime increases of 70% in the last year. That's almost a doubling. Some, it's been worse than that. But, inflation is the worst tax on people. And one thing the Biden administration was so out of touch with, when these are the commerce secretaries and all, who are supposed to understand it, even said that only the super wealthy care about inflation. The poor people don't care. It doesn't affect them. It's the opposite. The super wealthy will benefit from inflation. They know what to do. They know how to handle it. They know how to prosper on top of it. It is the poor who are the most devastated.
Yeah.
But one crime in a city rising does more destruction to the economy of that city than inflation does even. And we've got both. We've got crime rising faster than inflation. And these are two elements of the perfect storm that are going to be absolutely devastating. And but one of the things we've got to do, our government, our federal government especially, is not going to protect us. They're opening the borders, and opening our communities to this kind of assault. They're in collusion with this kind of assault on us. We've got to protect ourselves. I tell you, there are many great sheriffs throughout our country. You know, they're the number one, constitutionally, they are the number one law enforcement authority in every single county in the country. The sheriff, they're the only elected, or just about, some police commissioners and all may be elected, but virtually they're the only elected law enforcement officials throughout the country. Our sheriffs have been getting educated. And many of them are stand up and do, but they can only do so much. 200, 300 deputies can't possibly cover many of these counties. The local police forces, many of which have been defunded or had their funding cut or had their hands tied behind their backs in being able to deal with threats and all in their communities. We've got to be able to protect ourselves, our families, and our neighbors. And if we're not willing to do that, to stand up, to me, this is the worst kind of dereliction of duty of someone who's been given authority and responsibility. We have to do that.
Yeah, well, you know, when you think about policemen, my heart really, I feel compassion for them. You know, what has happened in the last year and a half, obviously what happened with George Floyd, you know, was a terrible thing, but we cannot live as though the majority of policemen are evil or would do such a thing. Most of them are decent people who are already on high alert because they're afraid of, you know, potentially losing their jobs or even going to prison for a number of years. I think we really need to pray for our policemen. If you see a policeman, a firefighter, you know, I think words of encouragement, words of affirmation go a long ways. Buy them a cup of coffee or something. I think there's things.
Dinner.
Yeah, there's things we can do with all that they're dealing with to let them know. If a number of us do that and step up and do that, it really absorbs a lot of the blow that they're dealing with in our culture right now.
Yeah, and you know, it's been studies have shown that your average police officer is facing the stress levels every day equal to a combat soldier in combat. You know, every time a policeman has to pull a car over, their heart rate goes through the roof because they don't know they're going to face there. Most policemen have to deal with domestic violence issues about an average of once every 3 days. Some cases, depending on where they're operating, more than that. And 1/3 of those, their life is going to be threatened, the policemen. They are on an edge. And, you know, even combat soldiers, when you've been in combat, you know, for a period of time, usually a week or a few weeks at the most, you're sent to the back for R&R. You get rest. You get recovery. You're not kept in combat all the time. Our first responders are on the edge. They don't get that time off. I mean, they get some vacation off, but not like they deserve. And I tell you, if you ever see patrolmen in a restaurant, pick up their tab, pay for their dinner, show your appreciation. We need to be picking up their rent checks and things like that. But they are truly some of the great heroes. And, you know, I was in the military during the Vietnam War, and I remember we used to buy wigs when we went home on liberty because our country hated us. They would spit on you in airports and things like that if they thought you were in the military back then. And that's changed. And I'm so thankful that it's changed in regard to our military here and the great respect and all that they're being shown. But I tell you, our policemen are getting the worst kind of treatment even from American citizens. And you know what that does? It's not helping them with the situation. Now, you just think of yourself being under that kind of stress continually with almost no breaks every day. where you don't know if this is your last day or not. And you know there are people ambushing policemen. You know there are people trying to get pulled over so they can shoot a cop. And all this is going on. And then you're under that kind of tension all the time. I can't understand why there are not far more overreactions. And these are overreactions, the police brutality and all sometimes. Why there aren't many more meltdowns and all, not excusing them, but understanding them. You know, it's, to me, they are doing an unbelievable job restraining themselves. So really, like he said, pray for your police. Do anything you can to honor them and show your appreciation. Firemen, first responders, you know, the medical teams that go out and the things they face, they see the worst of tragedies on almost a daily basis. The terrible accidents and everything else they have to deal with. You know, they really deserve our support and respect.
Yeah, and I think that law-abiding people with morals will appreciate people like that. I mean, you hear about soldiers that come home from war, Rick, and they deal legitimately with what they refer to as PTSD. But like you said, wartime soldiers will, you know, whether they're in it a week or a month or whatever, in the real hot action, eventually they get pulled out. They get
really
pulled
quick.
back.
They don't leave them in that situation for too long.
There you go. Well, these policemen, talk about PTSD, talk about trauma. You know, I'm really concerned about the growing threat of police suicide.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a reality, folks, and I think that this is why I feel like, you know, we should always pray for them. But then on top of the pressure they're getting for, you know, the things that have been on the news the last year and a half since the George Floyd incident, on top of all of that, the vaccine mandates. I mean, the policemen that are resigning right now, it's all over the news.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they want to have the freedom. So I'm not trying to get on that subject again. I'm just pointing out these are people that are really under stress, dealing with the levels of crime that are rising mostly, by the way, mostly in Democrat-run states and cities. And so law and order has to be restored. And
Law and order is going to be a main election theme coming up, platform. You're going to have either chaos and anarchy or law and order. And when you see these coming under so much pressure, yes, there is a tendency to overreact. We don't want to overreact in law and order. But I tell you, there needs to be a restoration of respect and honor for the law and for those lawmen and lawwomen who are protecting us and putting their lives on the line virtually every day for us. So, but, you know, we could talk so much more about all these and should, and we will continue to bring up points on these in the coming times, the coming programs, but also, you know, we've got the election fraud and the 2022 elections coming up. Mm-hmm. You know, and I talk to a lot of people. I talk to them all the time. Many I don't talk to, but I hear from them. I get messages and I get all kinds of stuff. And I don't have a study to verify this, but I believe a huge percentage of people who do not vote, they don't because they don't believe in the integrity of our elections. And that integrity of our elections was just about destroyed in the last election.
Yeah.
And now I looked at the evidence. You know, our corporate lawyer for our ministry was very involved in the investigations, the subpoena, the things that were the states that were bringing forth these challenges to the elections. some of those that went to the Supreme Court, and basically our courts washed their hands of it, which hurt the trust in our courts probably more than anything in decades. It's like they're not going to do the right thing. They're not going to stand for the Constitution. And there were real constitutional issues here that they should have jumped on. Our Constitution was being so violated. But we're in a situation, too, where I'm talking to a lot of Christians who have been really engaged and resolved to vote every time the polls are open for everything. They got so discouraged after the last election that they're saying, why vote? Why go out and vote? It's just going to be, we're going to have the same thing. Now, I think there are. I looked at the evidence. There was unprecedented voter fraud in the last election. I think it was way more than enough to throw the election, change the outcome, not just at the presidential level, but across the country. It was shown. And the people were saying there was no election fraud or not enough. There's some election fraud in every election, but there wasn't enough then to throw the election. They either don't know what they're talking about because they didn't really look at the evidence and they're just sharing the party line, or they are the most naive people, I think, on the planet. I don't see how you could look at a little bit of it and say, that alone, they're like 10 different things that are each one could have thrown the election, and they were all combined. We will not have true elections with integrity, without voter ID. The African nations, the democracies in Africa, every single one of them requires voter ID for a vote.
Yeah.
The UN does not certify an election that doesn't have voter ID. The whole world. And for our country to say these minorities, you're disenfranchising them by requiring them to have a voter ID, that should be the biggest insult to those minorities. If people in the bush in Africa know how to get an ID, yeah. Are we saying our minorities they cannot figure out how to get a voter ID? I guarantee you they have an ID because you can't buy cigarettes, you can't buy alcohol, you can't buy many things in this country without an ID.
Can't drive a car.
Can't drive a car. There's so many things. You got to have an ID. So that argument is the stupidest argument in the world. And to me, it is racist at its core. It's not trying to protect the vote of the races or the minorities. It's insulting to them, and many of them have said so. So voter ID is one thing. The other is when there are mail-in ballots. The fraud was millions of votes in the last election were unbelievably corrupted. They had thousands. We had voter operators, and there were affidavits signed by Democrats who worked the polls, who said these mail-in ballots would come in perfect numerical order according to their serial number on the ballot. Now, how many of them would go out to people and have them mail in and them to get to the polling station in perfect order? Thousands and thousands. And they testified with affidavits, which is you're swearing, you're putting your name. You could be guilty of fraud if you sign an affidavit that isn't real, that isn't true. And they were willing to sign affidavits saying that they saw poll workers, recycling the same votes through machines. And then the investigation of the voting machines themselves, showing how they were pre-programmed. No matter how many votes you put in there, it came out with the same percentage for the candidate. All this stuff. Listen, this has to be fixed. If we don't have integrity in our elections, in our vote, we no longer have a republic.
Right.
This is the foundation of our republic. And I've seen some states have been passing laws and all, try to get a hold of this. Now, constitutionally, We know that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Supreme Court is not the supreme law of the land. They get it wrong a lot. The federal government is not the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is. Article 2 of the Constitution makes it clear that the election policies are to be made by the state legislatures, not the state governor, not the state secretary of treasury secretary of state. Each state has a secretary of state. That only the legislatures of the states can mandate the policies for elections. They were changed autocratically by governors, by secretary of state, sometimes attorney generals, whatever in these states, very basically unconstitutionally in the last election. And that's what, that alone made our election, one that will always be challenged, always, be doubted. And then you look at, there is some science to political science.
Yeah.
They've got algorithms and all that they know that almost like the laws of physics, it's a sure thing that the head of the ticket is going to have a certain measurable coattail effect, can be within a range, but it's never outside of that range. Biden's coattail effect did not show up in any state. And Trump's coattail effect, they said, was the opposite of what it always is. According to the science of this history of all these elections, they have, we have Hillary beaten Biden in every state that they both won. Hillary got more votes, except for the swing states, 6 swing states.
With the big cities in them.
Yeah, and things like that, that there's the science of real political scientists, and they're fake political scientists too. The real ones know, some of them even said that election was mathematically impossible. Could not have happened. Could not have had the outcome that it did. Well, I could go on, but do not believe for a minute there was not unprecedented corruption in our previous elections, and this must be fixed if we're going to have a republic.
Yeah. I think, too, Rick, if you look at the 2016 election, do you remember when they asked Donald Trump in some of the last debates the question, will you accept the results if Secretary Clinton wins the election? And he said, I just want to take a look at the results, and if I really legitimately lost, I'll accept the defeat. And Clinton, because she thought she was going to win hands down, said, how dare he? This is what our democratic system's about. If you lose, you lose. Well, it just so happened, it turned out that she lost, and the Democrats for 4 years refused to accept the results of that election, challenging Trump's legitimacy all 4 years. Now they're shaming Republicans because we're concerned about election integrity. And the difference with the 2020 election, even though there was prior elections, there was fraud, this election, the mass mail-in vote began to happen on a level it never has. Many of the states, Florida, look at Florida. Florida had already things in place to where they could handle the mail-in vote and be able to check it to make sure it was legitimate. A lot of these other states didn't have time to do that. So we definitely need, and one last point, the fact that Joe Biden ended up allegedly getting 16 million more votes than Barack Obama got in 2012, 8 years prior. Who are you kidding?
And Trump legitimately got 10 million more than any president in history running for re-election, and Biden gets millions more than him? And where'd they come from? I go out there now, you can't find a single person admitted to that voted for Biden. I'm just joking there. There were some, but not that many. Trump was told, you get 65 million votes, you can't lose. He got 75 million and lost. How did that happen? And you saw the energy behind. I mean, any thinking person is going to question this. Well, when people are questioning in their hearts the very integrity of our elections, this is foundation to us remaining a republic. It's got to be recovered, and it's got to be fixed before the 2022 elections. And we don't have much time. I tell you, vote out of office every cowardly Republican who isn't standing up for this. Vote out of office every cowardly Republican who cowers before the accusations of the left that you're hurting our election integrity and all by challenging it. No, the only thing that's going to ever recover our election integrity is challenging it and fixing it. And I'm just saying, bless their hearts. And one last thing we would like to share on this program, but you know, the NBA's shameful capitulation to China and Enes Kanter's NBA player courageous rebuke of Nike, supposedly the most powerful force in sports. His incredible rebuke of Nike for silence on China's slave labor, who makes the Nike shoes, and Nike supposedly makes all this stuff. And the NBA also, because the NBA was such a huge future base, a fan base and everything else for their programs, how they capitulate to the Chinese. And so many players did too, against their own country, the United States of America. But thank the Lord for courageous people like Enes Kanter.
Amen.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. State Department estimates that up to 2 million Uyghurs, I think that's how they pronounce it, Uyghurs, and other ethnic minorities have been detained in internment camps since 2017. And so the Center for the Boston Celtics, who Rick is talking about, has basically risen up and just says, you know, the minorities are being treated poorly. He actually wore, Rick, customized shoes the other day, the past weekend, when his team played, that said, written on the shoe, modern day slavery, no more excuses. He was calling out the fact that Nike has remained silent while calling out all of the racial injustice in America, them basically funding slavery and slavery, you know, slave labor, yes, thank you, in China. And, you know, the fact that he's calling that out, and you know, he's saying you're not addressing, he actually put this on Twitter, you don't address police brutality in China. You don't speak against discrimination in China. You don't say a word about the oppression of minorities in China. He said, you're scared to speak up. Those are his words. So this is another example of human courage, taking a stand, rebuking Nike, but really rebuking the NBA as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, thank the Lord for any courageous person. We're all called to walk in that kind of courage. And trust me, there is such a vacuum of courage today that anyone who demonstrates courage is going to stand out boldly. You will make yourself a target. But I tell you, it is much better. It will be far better than coming before that throne of judgment on that great judgment day and hearing from the King of Kings, I made you a watchman and you did not sound the alarm. I made you a shepherd of my sheep. And not, you know, you don't have to have a pastor's certificate to be named a shepherd by God to help watch over and protect his people. We're all called to be our brother's keepers. But to not stand up and do anything against these issues, we don't want to come before the throne of the King of Kings and hear those words instead of well done, good and faithful servant. So let's be those. Let's stand with courage, stand with boldness, and in due time, you're going to see, like it says in Isaiah 60, when darkness covers the earth and deep darkness of people, the glory of the Lord is going to rise upon his people and appear upon them. Then the next verse says, and the nations will come to the brightness of your rising. The light is going to win. Thank you for joining us for these prophetic perspectives programs.